This is a key to the worksheet dealing with finding slope. And in numbers 1 and 2, you're given 2 points and you want to use the slope formula to find the slope of the line that contains or passes through those 2 points. So let's go ahead and look at number 1. So here's number 1. We have these 2 points, negative 3, 4, and we have the other point being negative 6, 2. And remember, the slope formula is slope equals, and remember, it's a change in y divided by a change in x, so it's y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Now remember, the order does matter, so if you put the second y coordinate first in the numerator, then you have to put the x coordinate, the second x coordinate, first in the denominator. All right, so that does matter. It also helps if you label these points. Let's go ahead and call this point here the first point. So we'll call this x sub 1, y sub 1. And this, let's call the second point. So it'll be x sub 2, y sub 2. So sometimes that helps students to substitute these values into the formula. So we get the slope equals. And let's go ahead and start with y2. So y2 is positive 2. And I need to subtract from 2 the other y coordinate, which is 4. So I have 2 subtract 4 in the numerator. Since I started with 2, this 2 here that came from this point, I've got to start with that x coordinate that comes from this point. So x sub 2, which is negative 6, subtract, and then the other x coordinate is negative 3. All right, so simplifying this, 2 subtract 4 is a negative 2. Now in the denominator, remember, a negative 6 subtract a negative 3 means the same thing as negative 6 plus the opposite of a negative 3, which is a positive 3. And then simplifying that numerator, negative 6 plus 3 is a negative 3. Reducing this, you need to know that negative divided by negative is a positive, so you get a positive 2/3. All right, so that is the slope of for number 1. Now remember, it did say show work, so you need to show the work to get your points. So this is 2/3. All right, the second one, we have the point 0, negative 2, and the other point is 0, negative 1. So it's the same idea. You're just going to go ahead and substitute these values into your formula. It helps if you label these x sub 1, y sub 1, x sub 2, y sub 2. So we get the slope equals. Let's go ahead and start with y2. So y2 is a negative 1. I'm going to subtract from it the other y coordinate, which is a negative 2, divided by, now since I started with y2, I have to start with x2. That's very important. You make sure you're keeping these notations here correctly. You're using the same notation. So since I started y2 in the numerator, now I must start with x2 in the denominator. So I'm going to say 7 subtract the other x coordinate, which is 0. The numerator, negative 1 subtract negative 2 means the same thing as negative 1 plus the opposite of negative 2. So remember, you're changing subtraction to an addition problem. So to change subtraction to addition problem, remember, you always add the opposite of this number. So the opposite of negative 2 is a positive 2. And then 7 subtract 0, that's easy, that's just 7. The numerator now becomes, when you simplify it, negative 1 plus 2 is a positive 1, so you get positive 1, 7. Okay, so that is the slope for the second one, 1, 7. Okay, now let's go ahead and look at part B. Now in part B, it says for each of the following, the slope of a line is given. And it says indicate if the line rises, falls, is horizontal, or is vertical. And then write one of those words in each of those blanks. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do that here. So remember, if the slope of a line's positive, it means that the line rises, right? So the line rises. So if the slope of the line's positive, it'll do like it'll rise from left to right. So as you go from left to right, the slope rises. All right, so that means the line rises, so that means the slope is positive. All right, if the slope is negative, that means that as you go from left to right, if the slope is negative, that means that your line falls. So your line falls. If the slope is zero, if the slope is zero, that means you have a horizontal line. So that's slope 0. So the line is horizontal. And if the slope is undefined, that means you have a vertical line. So the line is vertical. Okay. All right. And so that is the key to this worksheet.